So I've got this kind of weird thing where I can't film a YouTube video unless I brush my teeth first. I realize that's kind of dumb because you obviously can't smell my breath over the camera, but it's kind of like, you know, you have like a job interview or some like, I don't know, presentation or something that you have to give. Like that's how I feel. So before I record these videos, I always have to go and brush my teeth first. So my teeth are freshly brushed and we're ready to go. So the number one thing that I always hear on my channel is I don't have any money to invest in real estate. Yet, believe it or not, for most of these people, or even just a lot of these people, the money that they need to buy their first property or maybe their next property is sitting under their mattress. And I'm being completely serious when I say that. The money to fund your next deal is literally under your mattress, under your feet. It's in the house that you're currently living in. Today we're talking about how you can use the equity that's tied up into your house to be able to grow and purchase more rental properties. Or maybe it's just your first rental property. Whatever it is, you can use the money in the equity in your house to be able to purchase rental properties. If you're new to the channel, thanks so much for being here. Let me introduce myself. I'm Bryce. I talk about everything real estate and personal finance here on YouTube. If you like videos just like these, please be sure to subscribe down below and give me a thumbs up if you could. Also, if you want, you can follow me on Instagram down below. I try and post there pretty regularly and it's a lot less formal than these YouTube videos. I'll post videos about properties that I'm currently working on, or most of the time, actually, it's just stupid memes. So if you like that, definitely go and follow me down below. Okay, so first and foremost, what is a HELOC and what does it stand for? A HELOC is a home equity line of credit. This is a line of credit given to you by a bank or a lender, typically a credit union. And what they do is they'll give you access to these funds, they'll give you access to money, and they're going to use your house as collateral. Essentially, this allows you as the homeowner to pull money out of your house, to access money from the equity in your house without having to actually sell the house or refinance the house. Of course, those are options, but typically people don't want to do that, and so a HELOC is a quick and easy way that you can gain access to a lot of money. The amount of money that a lender, again, typically a credit union or a bank, is going to give you is dependent on how much you owe on your mortgage and how much your house is worth right now. Okay, so just hypothetically speaking, let's say you own a home and it's worth about $300,000 right now. So you've owned it for the last 10 years, you've been paying down the mortgage consistently, but also in that time, your market has gone up and appreciated. So you may only owe $100,000 on your house, but it's now worth $300,000. So there's a $200,000 spread there that a bank will give you a loan on. The difference between what you owe and what the property is worth, that spread in between here, that's called equity. And in this case, 300,000 minus 100,000, you've got 200 grand in equity. So now what you can do is you can walk into a bank, you can walk into a credit union, you can walk into any lender and say, hey, I would like to get a HELOC on my home. What they're gonna do is they're going to assess your property and then they're going to put something called a lien on your house. And that's just a fancy term for something saying that you owe somebody money. Typically speaking, most banks and credit unions, they'll give you anywhere from 75 to 85% LTV, which stands for loan to value. It's a fancy term. I promise you it's not that confusing. So going along with our sample numbers, let's say your house is worth $300,000. They're going to take $300,000 and they're going to multiply it by that loan to value. So 75% to 85%. We'll just go with 85%. So 300,000 times 0.85 comes out to $255,000. Now, don't be confused yet. That's not the number that they're going to give you. What they're going to do is they're going to subtract what you owe, the balance left on your mortgage, from that $255,000. So 255 minus that 100,000 that you still owe on your mortgage, that's $155,000 that their bank is going to give you as a line of credit that you'll have complete access to. This is literally as good as cash. If you wanted to, you could pull out all $155,000 of that, which I wouldn't recommend, but you really can, really truly go and spend it like cash. I highly recommend that you use that money on investment properties, but if you wanted to, you could go down to Costco and buy that $4,000 flat screen TV that you've been eyeing. Please, 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 please don't do that. But the point I'm trying to illustrate is this is cash. You can use this for whatever you want. A lot of people, if they're not kind of investors or interested in investing in property, a HELOC is typically just used for bigger, expensive purchases. So say you want to do a kitchen remodel in your house, or whatever you want to do, a lot of people will pull out a HELOC to be able to pay for that remodel using the equity in their home. So again, just to illustrate, a HELOC is good as cash. Now, having said that, a HELOC also acts like a credit card. So let's say you go to the bank, they give you that $150,000 line of credit, and you go to buy a rental property. You put $50,000 down on a rental property. You now have $100,000 left that you can use on your HELOC. Now, somehow you decide to refinance that property, or you cash it out, or whatever it is. If you take that $50,000 and pay off the $50,000 that you owe on your HELOC, you're now back up to that $150,000 threshold on your line of credit. So you can spend money, you can replace it, spend money, replace it. It works just like a credit card as you pay off your balance. Most HELOCs have something called a draw period, and this is typically 10 years for most banks. What this is just a 10-year period of time where the bank will give you access to that money. At the end of that 10 years, if you have a balance that's owed on the HELOC still, they'll force you to make payments. In between that time, in between that 10 years, if you have a balance, the only thing you're paying is interest. But let's say you have an outstanding balance of $50,000. At the end of that 10 years, they're going to close your HELOC, and you're going to have to start making principal payments on the $50,000 that you owe still. But again, during that 10 years, it's interest only, which is huge, which I'm going to talk about later in the video. One thing I do want to clear up though is there is a big difference between a HELOC, which is a home equity line of credit, and a home equity loan. These are two very different products, and I don't want you to get confused between the difference between these two. So as I mentioned, a HELOC previously works like a credit card. A home equity loan is a little bit different. So the home equity loan works very similar to a mortgage. So if you get a loan, what they're gonna do is they're gonna write you a check for the full amount, and they're gonna hand it over to you. And from day one, you're going to start having to pay interest and principal payments back to the bank. And most of the time that's not what we want, because I may or may not have found a property yet. So with a home equity line of credit, with a HELOC, if I have a zero balance, I pay nothing in interest. So I can pull out a HELOC and have access to those funds, and I'm not paying interest yet. I'm just looking and waiting and analyzing deals, analyzing my market, and waiting until I find a property, and then I can use those funds to jump on a property really quick. I think the only benefit to a home equity loan as opposed to a line of credit is the fact that the interest rate is fixed. Just like when you go get a mortgage, typically you get a fixed rate, and the loan is no different. You have a set interest rate and it never changes. With a line of credit, it does fluctuate, and it's based off the prime rate. So as interest rates go up and down, your interest rate on your HELOC will also change. Right now though, interest rates have never been lower, and I think the interest rate on our HELOC is 5 or 6%. It's very reasonable. It's not that much. So obviously there are a few differences between the HELOC and the home equity loan, and it's very important to understand the differences between the two. But most of the time I do not recommend getting a home equity loan, and almost always recommend getting a line of credit. Okay, so you're ready to apply for your HELOC. What do? You go to the bank and you say, hey, I want to get a HELOC on our property. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to do an appraisal or an assessment on your property. They just want to find out how much your property is worth. The whole process to getting a HELOC is very simple. It was really quick for us. I think the whole process from start to finish took 2 weeks total, and I think there was $100 or $200 sign-up fee to be able to access all these funds. So once that process is done, the bank will tell you exactly how much money you have access to at your fingertips, and then you're pretty much ready to go shopping. So as soon as you know exactly how much money you have, there's really two ways that you can go and purchase a property using your HELOC. One is to use the funds from the HELOC to buy the property outright using all cash, or you can also use the money from the HELOC to apply for a mortgage, but use that money as the down payment on your property. Okay, think about this scenario. Let's say you have $100,000 in your HELOC. You go out, you find a property, it's $90,000. What you can do is you can tell the sellers, hey, rather than $90,000, I'm gonna pay $80,000, but I'm gonna close in 2 days. And because your HELOC is as good as cash, you can do that. You can buy the property outright. The only thing that you have to wait on really is the title company. Then 2 days later, once you close on the property, you can turn right around, go to a bank and refinance that property, pull all of your money out and get a mortgage on the property. Now, you're asking why would you do that rather than just getting a mortgage in the first place? One, you got the property for $10,000 less than they were asking for because you had cash. And two, because you had cash, you may have beat out any other offers that were also on the table because you could close so quickly, and so the sellers decided to go with you. So now, because you have $10,000 in equity, when you go to refinance this property, you could essentially be out of pocket almost zero for your down payment, or at least very little, because you gained instant $10,000 in equity. So hopefully that helps to illustrate why having a HELOC is such an incredible tool to have at your disposal. When my wife and I were just getting started in real estate, I remember we had just closed on our first deal. And I think a week or maybe 2 weeks later, another deal came up on the market and the numbers worked. It was a great deal. It was a great property, and we wanted it so bad. We wanted to keep growing. We wanted to continue. But the problem was we didn't have any money. We were completely out of money after buying the first property. And so what we did was we used our HELOC for the down payment on that rental property. We pulled $17,000 out of our HELOC, used that for the down payment, and we were able to close on the property, which we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. One word of caution. If you're going to buy a rental property using a HELOC, you absolutely have to be certain of your numbers. You need to double check, if not triple check, your numbers, even more so than when you're going to be buying just a regular property with cash without a HELOC. And the reason for that is because now when you use a HELOC, you now have two payments. You have one payment for your mortgage and another payment, you have to pay back the balance that you owe on the HELOC. And you might be saying to yourself, well, great, Bryce, now because I have two payments, I'm never gonna be able to cash flow on a property. My numbers are never gonna work. And you may or may not be right. If that's the case, then yeah, it doesn't work. And that's why you have to be so certain that your numbers work with the mortgage and your HELOC repayment. For this reason, I actually typically don't recommend that you use a HELOC for a down payment on a property, because you're stuck with exactly that. You now have two payments instead of one, and it makes it a lot harder to cash flow. Personally, I like to use them for short-term projects like a fix and flip house, or buying a property cash outright, like I mentioned before, and then refinancing later. I realize that I just told you not to use your HELOC for the down payment on a rental property, even though that's exactly what my wife and I did. And the reason that I say that was because my wife and I had an exit strategy. I think 3 or 4 months later, we were able to pull funds from something else to be able to pay off the money that we owed on the HELOC. And that's exactly why I recommend it. It's really just not that great of an idea if you're planning on holding this property for 30 years. If it's 90 days or 6 months or even a year, and you're okay paying that interest temporarily, and you wouldn't have been able to buy the property if you didn't use the HELOC funds, then yes, absolutely, that's what this is for. But don't think of it as a way to just have access to all this money for a property that you're gonna hold for 30 years and really have no exit strategy. And it's not to say that it's completely impossible, but when you are paying two payments, it's a little bit more difficult to have your numbers work and have the cash flow work as well. Now, after watching this video, if you realize that a HELOC just really isn't right for you, if you don't feel like buying rental properties using a HELOC is for you, I still recommend getting a HELOC. And the reason for that is just access to quick cash. if you've got a water heater that goes out or a furnace that goes out, having access to those liquid funds still is an incredible tool to have at your fingertips. The next video I want you to watch is this one, which I'll link right here, which talks about how I run the numbers on a rental property to see if the math works out. And if you're planning on purchasing a property, whether you're using a HELOC or not, you definitely want to make sure that your numbers work out. So be sure to check out that video. Otherwise, guys, thank you so much for watching. I will catch you next week.